At this time, the Vice Chancellor, I'll crave your indulgence to recognize the Director of International Programs, Dr. Emmanuel Apani.
Alors, nous accueillons par ici le directeur des programmes internationaux.
Professor Emmanuel Apani. Thank you very much. The Vice Chancellor, sir, participants, students, at this point in time, would like to commence with the lead papers. We have had some time doing some things that will prepare us for the conference proper. So I'd like to invite to give us the first lead paper, Professor Mutumbo Nsenga, who is the Vice President and Chair Board of Commission of TIPADI, to come give us the first paper. Professor Mutumbo, sir. Please let's give a round of applause for Mutumbo, carrying him here
pour sa présentation.
Thank you very much. We'll request it's 30 minutes here. We beg that to do 20 minutes. Thank you very much, sir.
Do you hear me? We were told that because time is running short, so we will try to be brief, which means we are not going to read the papers the way we do that scholarly. So we are going to do the publication where you will find all the elements. So I will be talking about key point of reflection. So my topic was cover this Africa, Pan-Africanism and the challenges of the 21st century. As you well know, the 21st century has been marked by a profound paradigm shift in geopolitics and in world economy. Essentially what happened was that since 1945, the world was run by the US. And yet, between 2014 and 2020, China holds economically. At this point in time, in terms of parity purchasing power, China is number one. But in terms of traditional GDP, it's still the US which is the leading. And this has created some fear, and Africans are put in a situation like during Cold War where they have to choose one or the other. And I'm sure you know the motto of Kwame Nkrumah, who said, we do not look west, we do not look east, we look forward. It's a movement which was tried, it worked not perfectly well. So these are issues I would like to talk about. So I will begin by saying why, as a vice president here, why we chose Nigeria to be the headquarters of our Pan-African Dialogue Institute. Then I will name some of the major challenges we face now, and then articulate a few points in terms of what our Pan-African Dialogue Institute intends to do with those points. Before I talk about Nigeria, let me just remind you of a saying which is quite widespread in Africa, where people say Africans have become capitalists without capital, nationalists without nation. Africans to some degree consume what they do not produce and produce what they do not consume. All that was to show the level of economic weakness in which we find ourselves. Then why did we chose Nigeria to be the headquarters? There are 5 main reasons. The first one is the demographic weight. I used to say that Nigeria is to Africa what China is to the world. Even though India caught up with China and superseded China in terms of population, but technologically not yet the same way. For those who are interested in following the data, Nigeria constitutes around 15% of the African population and 17% of its GDP. It's a giant on the continent. No one comes close in terms of population. That is simply the situation. The second, on the ground of economy, as I said, I don't know, for the economists, professors who may be in the room, you know that it doesn't change. Sometimes Nigeria is number one, sometimes it's South Africa. So Nigeria is has one of the largest GDP on the continent, and of course it's number one in the production of a variety of agricultural produce, and obviously it's a country which is very well known for oil. So economically, Nigeria is a powerhouse. Number three, on the ground of democracy, despite all the things that people talk about, Nigeria is quite stable. I do not know if you noticed that former presidents live in this country. That's not the case in Senegal. They all run away, they go to France. Macky Sall went to Morocco. It means that despite all problems, there is a wisdom in this country of conflict resolution and getting along. And it's a model for other people to follow. Number four, interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue, as you well know, despite the development of science, technology, and atheism, religion is still pervasive in our society. More than 80% of people believe in God. And religion plays a major role also in politics. With regard to the major religions of our time, Nigeria is the only country in the whole world where you have a large Muslim population living side by side with a large Christian population. The only. In other countries, it's either Christians are a tiny minority or Muslims are a tiny minority. It also means that anyone interested in interreligious dialogue, Nigeria is a good case study, which is useful for the entire world. Another point I need to point out here is that with regard to African traditional religion, the Yoruba religion is widespread outside this country. You find it in the Americas, and it has some influence. It has gone global to some degree. And this is also, if my PowerPoint could work, I could show you people who are part of Yoruba religion and who are not only African, but other people. And finally, Nollywood. Even though Burkina Faso and Senegal, Mali make film, this country is a leader in that area, and we do know the power of movies in shaping the image and projecting the image of a society. So in that regard, Nigeria is again a country which is very important. Now I come to the major challenges that we face in this century. The first one is economic weakness. Even though progress has been made after the independence, Africa, with 1.4 billion people, around 17% of world population, has a GDP of only 3%, equal to the GDP of France and equal to the GDP of California. This is not a lot for the whole continent. And I could point out many other examples. Second point, fragmentation. The continent is divided in 54 countries. We know it's 55, with one country still claimed by Morocco. Out of these 54 countries, 20 countries are microscopic polities. 8 of them have 1 or 2 million people. 5 have less than 1 million people. You understand that in geopolitics, those countries do not have much weight, and only unity is something which can help. Of course, we do have fragmentation and divisions due to ethnic differences, religion. Africa is the only continent divided into Francophone and Anglophone, and also into Muslim and Christian by and large. As long as there is peace among them, that works. If there is no peace, it becomes problematic. As a theologian said, Hans Küng, no peace among nations without peace among religions, no peace among religions without dialogue among religions, and no genuine dialogue without an accurate knowledge of one another. Number 3, on the issue of security, Africa is extremely weak. We do not have a defense industry. If really we were attacked by NATO, Africa cannot stand a chance. 4, there is the problem of education, political weaknesses. When we deal with major powers, our voice does not count much. And then there is the issue of alienation. Number 1, the legacy of colonial system and colonial education. And at this point also, what comes with mass media that we do not control. We do not control the means of production of knowledge and the means of dissemination of knowledge. In the long run, these are all issues which can handicap us. Number 7, there is a sense in which religion has become problematic. Opium. Religion stands as a double-edged sword, which is there to heal, promote law, and at the same time we know all the conflict generated by religious bias. And that's one of the major points that Dr. Fiong and myself, we care about, the issue of interreligious dialogue and critical thinking. Number 8, there is the issue of moral values, moral crisis. And 9, Afrophobia and Afro-pessimism. And number 10, the new scramble for Africa. This may be the most present. There is a former general in France, who recently said that Africa is the destiny of Europe, and that Europe must intervene militarily. He said, even though we've been kicked out from Mali and Niger, in 5 or 10 years we should come back and have impact in this country. The French Senate has had a whole session where they said that Africa is the future of France, Africa is the future of Europe. So these are all the challenges that we do face in this century. Now I will go quickly to conclude by highlighting elements of our Dialogue Institute and the Pan-African Dialogue Institute. Number 1, we are a scientifically driven institute. We do not want a slogan, we want a careful study. For instance, to say that there is corruption helps nothing. There is corruption everywhere. There is corruption in the US, etc. But we want careful study in terms of corruption about how much money, what is the impact of that, and what can lawyers and other people do to curb that. So we want to do things in a very scientific manner and keeping data. Number two, and this is something new to our institute, you know that Pan-Africanism has various phases. We had one in the Americas, London, Caribbean, then came to the continent with Jomo Kenyatta, Nkrumah, etc. At this point in time, Dr. Fiong and myself, we thought that the fact that Africa has been proven to be the cradle of humanity, and in the West, there are people who say publicly that we are all Africans. This is proven, but the point is we have not drawn consequences from that. What does it imply for civilization, for religion, for philosophy, for politics, for democracy, etc., etc.? Just for your knowledge, thanks. Briefly, with regard to the evidence, the theory started basically in 1920. And in 1959, Leakey discovered the Australopithecus and Zinjanthropus. Because Europeans, they were looking for the origin in Europe first, and then in China, Homo pekinensis. It's Leakey, a British who were living in Kenya, who put Africa on the agenda. At that time, it was based only on paleontological studies, so you test the bones. In 1987, near where I live, at Berkeley University, they did study mitochondrial DNA and came to the conclusion that we all descend from one mother, because there are elements that children inherit only from their mother, and you can trace that from mother to the first one. And that has been the most powerful evidence in genetic studies. It also turned out that Africans have the most diverse gene. We have more genetic diversity in Africa, which means also it's because to have mutations and diversification, you need time. In that sense, it's another evidence that Africa is the oldest population. So this is a point which is very important to us. I will just say briefly before I conclude that with regard to implications, we do know that one of the oldest civilizations is the one from Sudan and Egypt. Cheikh Anta Diop has proven that the Egyptians were not French, they were not British, they were Africans. And in 1957, Serge Sonneron, French Egyptologist, published a book, The Priest of Ancient Egypt, where he pointed out Greeks have written that the early scientists and philosophers used to go study in Egypt. In other words, what we call European civilization is to some degree the daughter of African civilization. In medicine, for instance, we have Imhotep, and this is not a fiction, he's the first physician more than 2,000 years before Hippocrates. In Germany, they do have papyri written by Imhotep, who have been translated and studied. They were performing surgery. You even had female physicians and all this organization. Solon in philosophy he went to Egypt, and when he came back, he reformed the legal system that somebody who has debt should not go to jail or to in that regard. He abolished jail based on debt of people. Those who study literature here, you know that Charles Dickens did not finish school. At 11 or 12, he left because his father went to prison for debt, and he has to help his mother take care of his children. And because of the debt, he became later on a great novelist. So that's just one point I wanted to point out. With regard to religion, it's very well known that the Bible, at least some texts, were clearly influenced by Egyptian texts. There are plenty of studies showing that monotheism started with Akhenaton 100 years before Moses. Moses grew up in Egypt. The Act of the Apostle says that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of Egyptians. So Moses was educated in the writing system and the religion of Egyptian. And if you go to the book of Numbers, chapter 12, Moses married a Cushite woman, meaning he had a black woman as wife. And that's in the Bible. All these things are known, but to draw conclusion and implication from those things. So rather than thinking Africa is just a continent bereft of spirituality, religion started here. There would be no Christianity without Egypt, and of course was also influenced by Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, etc. So when it comes to spirituality, Africa gave to the world a lot in terms of spirituality. So there are plenty of these things I could talk about. Just for our friends who are scholars here, let me talk about this one and then conclude. You can check a book called Anet by Pritchard. Anet is ancient Near Eastern text. He published in Cologne. So you can see a text from the Bible, from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, and you can see similarities. And you can see clearly how the religion of ancient Egypt influenced Christianity and so on. So I conclude just by saying that the other point which our institute focuses on is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a concept from South Africa. As you know, it's found in many other parts of the continent. And if I had time, I could show you the Pan-African approach to Ubuntu, the foundation of morality according to the wisdom of our ancestors. So that's what I have to say. Time is short. I will let my colleagues also take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mutumbo. I also trust